Welcome back, everybody, to the Rice Report. Thank you for coming to our conversation series. We are joined again here today by Patrick Henningsen, and this is such a pleasure. The last video we did was almost 4 months ago, and Patrick detailed almost in chronological perfect order exactly what would happen in Syria that has already happened. So, Patrick, thank you so much for coming back here. Patrick is the head of 21st Century Wire. If you haven't been to it, go to 21stcenturywire.com. You are going to get actual journalism with no real opinion. Patrick has opinions. Don't get me wrong. Patrick has plenty of opinions. But he is one of the few guys out there that's reporting without a filter. He's just getting the information from the Middle East, Ukraine, all the way through Israel, Europe. He's in England right now. So he's got a very good worldly view. And I think I rarely do this, but go to his website, watch his shows, watch his videos. Even if you don't agree with him, listen to the facts. Everyone has an opinion. Opinions are valuable. They are part of the American zeitgeist. It's what we believe in, but facts are immutable. And listen to what he's reporting, because some of the stuff he's bringing out here right now, especially with Syria, opened my eyes big time. I've been a huge fan, subscriber, supporter since that time. And it's just a very good balance. So thank you for joining us here today, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Eric.
So Syria, very serious issue. It seems like very few people in the world are talking about. We hear Palestine, Gaza, Yemen. We're going to cover all those. We're going to cover Iran. We're going to cover all that whole region. But Syria, we were just talking off camera about Maaloula. And can you walk us through, you've been to Maaloula. Most people have no idea what Maaloula is or where it's located and how much danger it's in right now. Can you walk us through your last trip there and what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, it's a very symbolic story, the battle for Maaloula, and it's quite an extraordinary thing. I made a short report when I was in Syria. I think this was in 2017, and it's symbolic of the entire story and everything that's played out there since December with the Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, HTS coup, if you will, takeover of the country, but it's an Aramaic community, and that's the original language that was spoken by Jesus Christ and was prevalent in the area, this part of the Middle East during biblical times. And this is why it was targeted. This is not my opinion and others. It was targeted by the so-called moderate rebels that were being backed by the U.S. and, as we know, backed by the Gulf. So Al-Nusra Front that became the Free Syrian Army that became Al-Nusra Front. But all these people, the memberships of these terrorist gangs, they just shifted between ISIS and these different, whoever was paying, basically. They moved from whatever group they rebranded. And so the Christian militias, self-defense militias, this is after these groups just popped up all over the place in 2012 because they're mixed in with the population, these so-called rebels. And also they had a lot of, it turns out, help from Western intelligence and Israeli intelligence to be able to position their attacks and take over of towns, villages, and so forth, and create siege situations whereby if they can defeat whatever the local police or defense was, and then they basically cordon off the areas that they have invaded and taken over, and then the army is in a very difficult position under Bashar al-Assad. They have to decide, how do we get these occupiers out? And this happened all over the country. And so you're in a situation where you try to get civilians out, and then if the civilians do get out, then what's left of these, quote, rebel terrorist fighters, and then you're in a siege situation. This is when buildings and cities and towns get completely pummeled by artillery, and you have a war, basically. And that's also done intentionally to destroy the infrastructure, the heritage of the country, and this benefits the people who are sponsoring the dirty war. These are the Gulf states. This is the United States, Europe, and Israel. So that was in their interest to demoralize and destroy places like Maaloula. These people came in, they kidnapped the nuns, they completely destroyed and vandalized all the ancient churches, defaced all the icons as well. And you'll find when we got in, talked to some of the priests and the local bishop and some of the nuns as well, people who tended to these grounds, local people, that they tried and made a big effort to hide a lot of the valuable uh, pieces of art and all historic triptychs and things like this. They had to hide them either in the basement. And I've seen this story many times. I saw it in Beirut as well, where they would build in the museums. They would build concrete and sarcophaguses over the actual item to make it look like there was something on top of it, when in fact it was inside. Just so
Huh.
when the other side comes in, or the terrorists or ISIS or whoever, in the case of the Lebanese war, it was other factions or even the Israelis. They think that the items, the really valuable, like Egyptian era items, because all that was part of the Egyptian Empire, was part of the Roman Empire, and going back, there's all a succession of different empires in Syria and Lebanon. So the history, you can imagine, it's like multi-layered. And then there's the Christian and the Islamic and the Jewish histories there that are mixed, but especially the Christian histories, because Syria is very much mentioned and features very prominently in the New Testament,
Yes.
especially, as well
Yes.
as the Old Testament. So Maaloula is right there down the road from Sednaya, and you have the Sednaya monastery there, and it's a very holy site as well that we had visited there. I don't know if you're allowed to go there right now with the current regime. I have no idea what happened or what the status of that is. I haven't had time to do inquiries on that, but I probably should. But Maaloula, there were people who defended that town, young men, and some were kidnapped, and this was very horrific for the families, because they captured some of these young men, and they didn't tell them if they killed them or executed them, or were held anywhere. There was no ransom, but and the bodies. So this would have happened probably in 2014,
Hmm.
13, 14. And so when I was there in 17, so it's been about 4 years afterwards, they discovered the remains of, I believe, four of these young men. And so there was a funeral in the old city in Damascus, which is quite far away from Maaloula, but it was thousands of people in the streets. It was very emotional. And this is at a time when there was artillery coming down on some of these areas that we were in, from
Wow.
terrorist occupied neighborhoods. And Damascus was a chaos with the different groups occupying different parts of the city. So you had safe areas and not safe areas, where there's no fighting and there's fighting. Army checkpoints everywhere. And I just remember the emotion. If you've been to an Arabic funeral, it's very emotional, especially charged with that theme. And the service was, they marched to a Greek Orthodox church in Babtuma, which is the old, beautiful, historic old Damascus. I mean, it's
Hundred
another
thousands
thing.
of years old.
Yeah, and in old Damascus, you also have the chapel of Saint Paul
Mhm.
as well, or in the Bible, Saul of Tarsus, or as we know him to be,
Paul.
Saint Paul, when he had his Damascene conversion on the road to Damascus, where that term comes from. All of that, what I'm describing is, the same places basically. That's
Mm.
the gates of Damascus and everything. So you can imagine, this is history plus the emotion of the war, plus the hate and the sectarian violence that our governments and the Gulf and Israel were so keen to inflame sectarian hatred between. But before that, Syria was amazing how much harmony they had between different religions. I mean, it was not an issue, because it was a federal secular government, you see, and everyone accepted that. It's just because they were at war, was very strict. The government, the deep state, if you will, in Syria, under the Ba'athist party system, is very tight, very rigid, because obviously there's Western powers and Israel trying to, overthrow their government, assassinate their leaders for like the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. It,
Nonstop. Yeah.
it does engender a type of, you could say, paranoia, but like heavy duty security, a lot of intelligence, and obviously they don't deal with color revolutions very well. They don't give them a wide berth. So so
Yes.
when, yeah, when the
They're not
Arab
opening
Spring,
the doors and letting them in. for sure.
No, when the Arab Spring came, the Syrian government's like, we're not having any of this because it's so easy for armed, extremist Islamist foreign fighters to infiltrate protest movements, and then you have, and then the sectarian issue between Sunnis and Shiites then could potentially become an issue, and that's what they wanted in the West and this Gulf states, and that's what they got at the end of the day. They ended up getting what they wanted. They got the sectarian division in Syria, but Maaloula, I went to a mass actually. They gave us a private mass in a very old church, the type of church that might hold, maybe 30 people,
Hmm.
kind of almost underground because there's old Christian churches underground, and it was in Aramaic and the songs were in Aramaic. It was very beautiful. I don't know if I recorded any of it or if we were allowed to record. I'm not sure. Maybe some of my colleagues might have. Maybe
Have been breathtaking.
I'll track that down maybe one day, um, it was the stories. I mean, the things they did. They burned. They they put they put. I can't remember what these terrorists did, but they did some insane things. Like
Sure.
they would roll tires down the. They'd get to the top of the canyon, roll tires down the hill to the monastery to set the roof on fire, and things like this. Kidnapped the nuns. They went straight for the nuns. I mean, these people have no, um, there's no limits as to what
Sure.
they're capable of doing. So forget about chivalry or anything of that, and none of that. So, and then we were meant in the West to cheer for this, saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, look at these rebels! They're fighting the evil Bashar al-Assad." We were completely skull plugged with all these propaganda campaigns that our government and mainstream media bought into. And it's so funny. They say, oh, the evil Assad, Assad the butcher, all of these terms that were
He was
thrown around.
protecting Christians.
He was protecting everybody.
Yeah.
He's protecting Sunni Muslims because the most amount of people killed by ISIS and Al-Nusra, HTS or whatever are Sunni Muslims. More
Hmm.
of they suffered the greatest. Normal people, normal civilians, people who wouldn't submit to their rule in Idlib were taken out, executed in the street, medieval style. Okay, so I think real Syrians or the types of Syrians that appreciate living in a peaceful, pluralistic society, they don't discriminate. Like all human lives are equally as valuable.
Yes.
They would defend Jews if they were persecuted in Damascus. And there used to be a Jewish community in Damascus, completely normal, living in harmony with the Christians and the Arabs. You go to a corner in the old city, you'll see a synagogue, which is no longer a synagogue because they all left after the creation of the state of Israel, but a mosque and a church literally across the
Hmm.
street. I mean, where else in the world would you ever see that? But Damascus. So Syria is very special, and this is why it's so rich in history, because there was that sort of and Jerusalem to a large degree the same thing.
Hmm.
Jerusalem had a long period of peace and coexistence between the three major Abrahamic faiths. I think there's an interesting story with there was maybe there's probably still some Jewish Syrians left, maybe a few, not many, but they were there was a lot of pressure for them to emigrate to Israel,
Sure.
and so Israel put a lot of pressure on the Sephardic Jews from the Middle East or Mizrahi from places like Baghdad, places like Iran, places like Damascus. They really wanted them to come to Israel after 48. And there was a lot of pressure put, even so much so, and this is declassified, by the way. This is well known. The Israeli, uh, uh, the forerunner of Israeli intelligence, early on had done false flag attacks against Jewish synagogues and stuff in Iraq to create the impression that they were under threat and that the only safe place for them was Israel because they didn't want to leave Iraq. They were happy there. They had no problems there. The same
There's
with
peace.
Damascus. Yeah, they preferred to that's where their heritage was. It's where their history was. And the communities they were integrated with the Muslim and Christian communities there. And so they created a false situation where it was like, oh my gosh, it's not safe anywhere outside of the Israeli territory. And then these governments had no choice. They said, you can go, but you can't come back. They didn't give them the option to be dual passport holders, and for obvious reasons.
Sure.
So
We should do the same.
well, yeah, and there was the security imperative there because a war was brewing, and they already had an Arab revolt under the British mandate in Palestine, and it was a very World War One between the wars, and then World War II comes. So there's always major security concerns. So places like Maaloula are very important historically, as well as in Aleppo. I mean, and the Crusader castles as well throughout Syria. Castle Crack is a famous one, and so you can imagine the heritage. Palmyra, 6,000-year-old temples that ISIS destroyed. They destroyed them. I was there right after the destruction of the Temple of Baal, and that was about 6,000 some odd years old, and they turned it to a pile of rubble. And the Syrians will rebuild it, by the way. In Aleppo, they're literally taking bricks or stones and organizing them in the roads and redesigning to match with I mean, Syrians are serious builders, serious engineers, serious architects. They can recreate to near perfection whatever the original was, even from a completely destroyed building. That's how dedicated they are to heritage, because before this mob took over, the attitude in Syria was, and they were really upset because of this Arab Spring and this fake uprising and the dirty war that followed 2011-12. Their tourism plummeted. They used to get millions of visitors a year, and that was an important part of their economy. A lot of people are employed taking Westerners and pilgrims, Christian pilgrims, Muslim pilgrims on tours. And there's a really important part for outreach. It's an important part of their economy. And that all basically, the bottom fell out of that. And their attitude has always been that this isn't our heritage. This is the world's heritage. We're opening our doors so you can come and really see it and for yourself. I mean, that was the real attitude and they were sincere about it, definitely. And that's just their Syrian attitudes, very, very open, very generous. That's why they were targeted by the U.S., by the Western powers, because they knew there was a level of openness there that it made it easier to infiltrate there, even though the government was very hard shelled. And the way they managed the country, because they had to, because they were at war, the people themselves. In fact, that's one of the reasons the country didn't collapse, because they had more internally displaced refugees than they had the ones on the news that you see on the boats to Greece, and that was a small percentage of war refugees. Most of them were called IDPs, internally displaced persons. And then how were they absorbed? They were absorbed by Syrians in other cities who opened their doors, opened their homes. And they're very kind of tribal and patriarchal in the sense that a lot of people will recognize their first and second cousins. So it's more of a larger family concept, if you will. So they won't accept somebody sleeping out homeless on the street. It's just unacceptable there. It's not for their culture. So they'll do whatever is necessary to make sure everybody's looked after. That held the country together, despite all of the pressure and the airstrikes by Israel, weekly airstrikes for a decade, U.S. bombings, sending in these crazy foreign fighters from Chechnya and Uyghur a Mongol invasion basically into Idlib. So yeah, I mean this. Yeah, so well, you can.
But
cut
now it's now
Yeah.
now we're in a position where we've had a clown show happen in Syria. Assad has fled to Russia. The U.S. endorsed these rebel fighters who are nothing more than Al-Qaeda and ISIS in disguise. They've conquered Damascus and they're moving throughout the whole country doing this. This reminds me a lot of Mosul in 2014. The conquering, the just destruction of ancient history, which different episode, but has tremendous amount of information about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They were stashed there as slaves after Second Kings in Mosul, which was called Nineveh. And we're watching this again with Maaloula. So I talk about this a lot. I get a lot of crap online from people by pointing out the obvious facts. When Israel started bombing Lebanon, almost for no reason, right? Yes, there was missile launching, but we never hear about the missiles that were launched first. We only hear, Fox News has 3 Israelis on a panel to talk about Israel. Like, you never hear the other side of the story. And when they started bombing Lebanon, it didn't take more than 30 seconds to go to Grok and say, well, what percentage of Lebanon is Christian? And it said 38% of Lebanon is Christian. What's the most highest density per capita of Christians? And that happened to be the first town that they started bombing. Like,
Mhm.
it seems to me, I'm not going to claim that there's an attack. I don't know what the purpose of any of these things are. I can only assume, just like you can. We can just look at the facts and make an assumption. But it looks to me like Christianity, they're trying to bomb Christianity out of the Middle East,
Yeah,
completely gone. So Maaloula is the last remaining place on planet Earth, the entire planet, that speaks the language of Jesus, Aramaic. Dug and carve. If you go to Maaloula, Syria, we're gonna have a video, one of your videos of you when you went there, put in here. But on your own, take some time and just go to Google Images, Maaloula, Syria, and Google this little town. It is beautiful.
mm,
Hundreds of years of carvings into the side of a mountain. These buildings have stood there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're still speaking the language of Jesus. And that seems to be where these rebels are directly pointing at, is like that's the final area that they must destroy for the deep state or whoever's conducting this. But we're going hand in hand with it. The United
yeah,
States has put money into this. We are investing. Syria, what you just described to me is exactly the opposite of what teachers and the media have told me about Syria. And it sounds a lot to me like that is, if you can't let someone sleep on the street, that's biblical values. That's loving your neighbor and giving them shelter for the evening.
yeah,
And we're trying to destroy all these countries that have this deep rooted tradition. This is no different than Germany in World War II, trying to go back to German roots. This is no different than almost any area for the last 150 years of people trying to defend their own homeland, their own culture, and their own history. We're fighting that battle here, Patrick. We have people destroying statues and changing history and changing names of things. What is this widespread? Is this just Syria? Is this also Lebanon? Is this? We're going to go into Yemen next because I think that's really confusing for a lot of
well,
people.
on the Christianity issue, there's a reason for that. Okay, this is actually a policy. And Lebanon's a little more complicated because Lebanon is really naturally part of Greater Syria.
Hmm.
But between the British and the French, they drew some very strategic and devious borders after the First World War and after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and it was also to keep to prevent a strong country from emerging, a strong Arab country from emerging, be it multi-ethnic, multi-religious, but it would be able to somehow withstand the pressures of European colonial powers and the creation of the state of Israel. And Greater Syria encompassed Syria as you see it on the map, and Lebanon, plus Palestine and Jordan.
Yes.
So imagine a country that size with Jerusalem as a neutral, independent, or say internationally protected city for obviously for pilgrims and
Sure.
for the heritage, and because you don't want people fighting over it, you know. But imagine the region if that was the case. And imagine if that was done without a Gulf monarch, and it
Hmm.
was actually a normal kind of government with different religions and different ethnicities and whatnot. This is a very potentially a very influential country globally. You know, that was a different path of history where it forked, and that wasn't to be. They didn't want to let that happen, and the British promised the Arabs an independent state. They never delivered it. So, when we say the Arabs under the Ottoman Empire, they were second tier
Hmm.
citizens, if you will, subjects under the Ottoman Empire, where the Ottoman Empire was ruled by Turkey, was the dominant power. But it was because Turkey was allied with the Germans
Hmm.
during the during
First World
the
War.
First
Yeah.
World War. Then it was the British imperative to uh, bring the Ottoman Empire down,
Hmm.
because Germany would have had access then to the to Mosul and Kirkuk and the oil in northern Iraq. Okay, and so it was the British and the French laid down their personal rivalries to do a joint effort to help to not defeat the Ottoman Empire directly, but manage the situation and manage its collapse. So it was really a European rivalry that destroyed and screwed up the Middle East. It's really the French and the British versus the Germans, and that includes the border drawing and everything. And what the British did was very sinister. So the Balfour Declaration was signed for the pledge for the creation of the State of Israel, but that was also designed to get curry favor from the Americans. Okay,
Sure.
and the Americans didn't necessarily want to enter the First World War because America was making plenty of money financing the First World War. Okay, how
Absolutely.
did we fill up Fort Knox? That's all European gold. We were financing weapons. So after the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, America had new, as you can appreciate, new fiscal and fiduciary powers with the new fractional reserve central banking revolution there, and they financed the First World War. And all those European countries were going bankrupt quick, and U.S. is sending them weapons, supplies, everything, and taking payment in gold.
Hmm.
And when they ran out of gold, it was IOUs. So then Europe becomes in debt. So people say that the British Empire collapsed after the Second World War. No. In real terms, although the pound sterling was the official world reserve currency after the First World War, until you had the Bretton Woods era and so forth, when the dollar kind of became, and then the petrodollar under Nixon. Before that, the dollar had already achieved saturation
Yeah.
globally as the most kind of used currency, the most amount of trade and so forth, right around the First World War. And then this basically accelerated that process, the First World War. And so eventually, to get the U.S. in, Woodrow Wilson didn't necessarily want to go initially into the war, but the European powers, especially the British, knew that the swing vote in America would have been the World Jewish Congress,
Hmm.
or the early Jewish lobby, of which the Zionist movement was just kind of coming in as a kind of recognized concept. And they knew that if they could, they had to do a three-way deal, which promised the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine.
Hmm.
And so with that implicit promise, it was enough to get them to basically support and then pressure Wilson to get the U.S. And U.S. came in late into the First World War, but that's how that kind of process began. And so it's a very unfortunate how it happened, that a lot of the turmoil that we see in these regions and the suffering is
Yeah.
a result of European and American machinations at the turn of the century. It's really crazy if you think about it, but it's the breakdown of the colonial system,
Yeah.
and and Israel being the final colony, if you will, the final colony, and they couldn't have picked a worse place to try that project. And so the rest, unfortunately, is history. But the British promised the Arabs that they would, if they would ally with the British and the French against the Ottomans, that and fight for the British as proxy forces,
Of course.
they would back a permanent independent Arab state. And what the British and the French did was they rugged them. They
Hmm.
did, they did a pump and dump, basically. They got them high on the idea. They got them to raise armies and fight for them. They're doing very well fighting the Ottomans, and then Britain and France did a side deal behind closed doors and rugged the Arabs, and then divided the whole territory between the French and the British and gave them nothing.
Maybe that's why they make all the Arab movies about flying carpets, because those can't be rugged from the air. That's
Yeah,
probably why
right.
they do it. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing is, you just mentioned something very few people do. In my opinion, this is solely opinion based on history. I believe that the Federal Reserve Act was put in place specifically for the financing of World War One. That's the fastest rise to a global reserve currency in the history of reserve currencies. You're looking at 1913. Right before that, you have income tax, then you have the Federal Reserve Act, and then you have this explosion of the dollar. There was decline for 4 or 5 years. Then World War One hit, and the money printers turned on big time. And even back then, there was no correlation between gold and dollars. It's always been a perceived trust in the government, like just trust us. So they're taking in all that gold there. Then you go through World War I, we're embedded in. World War II, we officially became the world reserve currency. But you got to remember 1933, they also restocked Fort Knox with our own money, with our
Mhm.
gold. Today is the 7th of April. On the 5th of April, this was the 92nd year anniversary of Executive Order 6102, where basically the American president stole the gold of all the Americans, supposedly to put it into Fort Knox. Something that's very little talked about in history, which is why you're seeing an emergence of Bitcoin and some other things, because people are starting to realize we can't trust. It doesn't matter who's running a government. We can't trust a government to actually peg a currency. Fascinating stuff. So
Well,
Syria,
on the Christian point, though, very important. I forgot to I forgot to say that, so there's an agenda by the U.S. by Israel to empty the region of Christians. Okay, there's an agenda, and the reason is they want to polarize the region. The problem is the Christians,
yes,
in Israel's eyes, because that's the thing that's keeping them from basically scorched earth policy. They don't want Westerners and they don't want Christians around. They want to polarize it, because then Israel can go to the world and say, "Oh, it's just us against all of these Islamic extremists." So they attack, they kill their neighbors, and of course, it makes people very angry, and they fight back. They raise their own militias like Hezbollah and so forth, and they fight back. And Hamas is a product of that as well, and as well as every other armed Palestinian liberation group, some of which are Christian as well as Muslim. But so they want to polarize the region, so that in Iraq too, in Iraq and Syria as well. So they say, oh, there's no Christians here, and then great, they can move forward with the Greater Israel project, which involves killing a lot of people. Okay,
yeah,
taking a lot of land in places. So they've emptied out Egypt. A lot of the Coptic Christians have left Egypt because of a wave of attacks against Coptic Christian churches. I'm talking about really 2008, 9, 10, around this period. You started, and nobody knew, oh, there were Islamic extremists or whatever.
always Islamic extremist.
Totally out of character. So this was a setup. They were either paying them, or they're same part of these radical gangs funded by Saudi and Qatar and these countries, and the Israeli intelligence and the U.S. intelligence and the British, working all these Muslim Brotherhood angles and cells. And so Egypt, then they're polarizing Egypt. Then Syria, a lot of them left through the various conflicts, but especially in the last 10 years. Lebanon as well. And why do Christians leave Palestine and leave Lebanon? For the simple reason that maybe their family networks extend a little bit more internationally, so they have the ability to get their kids out, for instance, or get families out to Australia, to Canada, to the U.S. And you meet these people when you go to these places, and you meet their extended family in Beirut, and is a very common theme. So for whatever reason, whereas the Muslim communities as well are pushed out, depending on what class they are, how much means you have to pay someone to get out, or to set them up in Toronto, or
Hmm.
to emigrate, or to be a refugee and get to America, or to Brazil, or to Mexico as well. So they're everywhere. They're all over the world, and so that's the narrative. And so if the Middle East is multi-racial, multi-religious, to me it's more stable and safer. But
Yes.
when it gets polarized, then that allows for this excuse that it's a clash of civilizations, and then Israel will say, "Woe, woe to us! The Muslims are trying to push us into the ocean. They want to kill us," and that's not even true either. And when you speak to Palestinians, and I learned this lesson very early on. I'm talking when I kind of red pilled, if you will, on this issue in the late '90s. Okay, because of my meeting Palestinian community, and having long dialogues and friendships with people my age at the time, plus older, and I realized that all they want is equal rights,
Yep.
equal representation, and to live a normal life, have a business, raise their kids, marry their daughters off and their sons, and be grandparents just like anybody else.
Just like we
That's
do.
all they wanted.
Yeah.
They don't want to kill all of the Jewish residents of Israel. At least that's the way it was in the '90s. I'm sure they're still at war, but they're willing to basically make amends and armistice if there's one state, equal rights for everybody under some kind of a constitution, and then everybody gets on. Whoever wants to stay, stay. Whoever wants to leave, leave. And whatever you want to name it, you can argue about that. Okay, whatever.
Right.
But not an apartheid state or an ethno-nationalist state. And this is the problem with ethno-nationalist states, is that they become very rigid, and it has all of these problems baked into it. This is why America is so successful as a country, because everything is based on a constitution.
Yes.
Okay. So the Constitution in America is to restrain the government. That's what makes America different than every other country. And so other countries have learned from this as well. And some modern republics have emulated the US system because it works for everybody. And so we as Americans should want to, we should want others to have that same benefit.
I agree.
Ironically, we're fighting to retain it at home, to keep our First Amendment with the current government as well. They're attacking the First Amendment with the student protests and stuff like that. But so I
We'll
find
get into that too, for sure.
so the Christian thing is it's and I don't know if I should name names or not, but you have people like Glenn Beck, okay, and Glenn Beck was marketing this Mercury project and the Nazarene project. He had all these things to rescue Christians from ISIS in Iraq, and he raised millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it was on right wing. If you listen to right wing talk radio, which I do and did for years, you would always hear these ads, and they're we're raising money, and he's got these people, and we got these families, and we're getting them out. These families don't want to leave.
Right.
They want to stay.
They're home.
They just don't want Western funded and Gulf funded and Israeli backed jihadists running around chopping heads and terrorizing their communities. That's what they want. And the Iraqis actually took up arms in 2014 and self-organized militias to basically eventually pushed and defeated ISIS. 3 years it took them. We're still, pardon my French, pissing around in Syria. And the Iraqis did it in 3 years on the ground. And the US then took credit for it. And the British took credit. They said, we defeated ISIS. They didn't. They didn't defeat ISIS. The Iraqis did, with the help of the Iranians.
Yeah.
And the help of Hezbollah. Okay. So and I met the militias in Iraq right after they defeated ISIS. And they kind of declared victory around October of 2017. I met the heads, and they're called the People's Mobilization Units in Baghdad, and they had a conference on counterterrorism. Myself and some top Western journalists were invited to attend this conference and learn about what happened, talk to military commanders, and see documents and footage of the fight against ISIS, meet residents from the villages where they were besieged and things like that. So I met the heads of Christian militias, Yazidi militias, Kurdish militias, Shiite militias, Sunni militias. The Sunni army, they had their own one specific group that defeated ISIS in a pivotal battle. So the People's Mobilization is not just all Shiite. The way the U.S. government and Mike Pompeo and Bolton and all these neocons say, "Oh, it's the Iranian proxies." No, they had Christians defending their communities, Yazidis, Sunnis, Shiites, all fighting together, fighting for the same cause. Patriots, all of them.
Fighting for their country.
We divide them. U.S., the West divide them. They're not as divided as we make them divided. And we decide who's the prime minister and who's the president. And we play all these games in Lebanon and all these places. Now you got terrorists in charge in Damascus. And you don't hear a word from anybody in Washington. In fact, you see Trump saying he's going to meet al-Jilani in Saudi Arabia next month. Was he going to shake hands with the former deputy head of ISIS, head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, one of the biggest head choppers, torturing, killing, shooting, executing women in the town square, total medieval barbarians. And Donald Trump's going to go and shake hands with that guy and recognize him as a president? That was a terrorist coup. If the U.S. government,
100% it was.
This is the first time in history that the U.S. government isn't pressuring a beer hall putsch, pardon the pun. I know it's Sharia, beer hall putsch, they should be pressuring them to make elections. But this guy who declared himself president and staffed himself, all his cabinet ministerial positions with other terrorists, okay, he said, maybe we'll have elections in 4 years. We're too busy now. So, and the British, the same. The Israelis, they don't care. They just basically used the opportunity to take over the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon, which gives them artillery fire straight over Damascus. They're 24 miles outside of Damascus. It gives them fire range over South Lebanon, and that's Syrian territory, which they couldn't take before because Assad wouldn't let them. The Syrian Arab Army had anti-aircraft. It was very well
formidable. Yeah, they're a formidable regional force.
Well, at least for defending their own country, they were capable, and we wore them down with sanctions and with all these terrorist fighters in places like Idlib, this little province up by Aleppo, where the Syrian government and the Russians, and with the help of the Iranian forces as well, were able to herd them all into Idlib with the promise. And this is where it really gets dark. Okay, Donald Trump, his first term. Okay. And I have to say this because when people say Trump didn't start any new wars during his first term, that's an absolute bold-faced lie. Donald Trump put boots on the ground in Syria in 2017, and they set up permanent occupation to this day, 25% of Syria's landmass with their Kurdish proxies. They never left. That was a new war. And then Syria, along with the Russians, the Iranians, and Hezbollah, were ready to do a counteroffensive in, I think it was 2018, to retake Idlib. 30,000 Al-Qaeda there. They created the Islamic State. That was the Islamic State ISIS couldn't manage to get. Al-Qaeda and Jolani created it in Idlib, take over a whole province of Syria, bordering Turkey. And Trump intervened because some activist, he claims, he boasted about this at a rally in 2019. He says, I saved Idlib. I saved Idlib. They were going to kill 3 million children and women in Idlib. Some Syrian anti-Assad activist in Washington, probably on the payroll of the CIA, told Trump, that you can't allow Assad to retake Idlib because you'll kill 3 million people. I don't even know if there's 3 million people totally in Idlib anyway. And Trump basically took that, U.S. threatened to bomb. Who knows what the actual threats were that were communicated, but I'm sure it was bomb Damascus and basically open the gates of hell for Syria. And then what they did was Turkey then intervened and said, we'll help to mediate this terrorist problem. And Turkey never did. They stabbed everyone in the back. And instead, they supported these terrorists who built themselves up to what we saw just this past last December. So Trump is the guy that saved HTS. It's Donald Trump. And he even says it on record. So, I mean,
who benefits the most from all this? Like, what's the end game?
The end game was Turkey and Israel allied together, and Israel used Turkey to support HTS. Israel provided the air cover. They were ISIS and Al-Qaeda's air force for 12 years. And so now the goal was to overthrow the Assad government and to have ISIS or Al-Qaeda take over Syria. And Turkey thought this was great because it kind of helps their Islamist reform agenda in the country, and maybe they can take the northern territory and steal Aleppo, which Erdogan has always wanted. But now that Turkey has got basically what it wanted, and now Israel's got what it wanted, which is the Golan Heights, and they want to cut a clear path through Al-Tanf, where the U.S. are. The U.S. will give them that path to Bukamal, then to Iraqi Kurdistan. It gives them a straight shot to the Iranian border. And they can fly airstrikes without U.S. refueling all themselves. There's no resistance over Syrian airspace. That's what this was all about. This was all about Israel. Now Israel's done with Turkey. Now they're threatening Turkey, saying, Turkey, you better move back. Turkey was moving in south into Hama, getting close to Damascus. And Israel's saying, no, you don't. So you could have a conflict down the road, not now, but there could be between Turkey and Israel.
Turkey's also formidable. I think it's the largest army in the Middle East, and I think they're also the number one weapons manufacturer in the Middle East.
Probably, and their drone capacity is pretty substantial, but they're the second largest force in NATO
Yeah.
by the numbers. Yeah, by the numbers, officially in NATO, if you don't count the Ukrainian proxy army. But so
So the Golan Heights will take when they cut that across, that'll take them right to the border.
yeah,
There will be Israeli controlled land touching Iran at that point.
not touching Iran, touching Iraqi Kurdistan, but Israel regards Iraqi Kurdistan, semi-autonomous region, northern Iraq, as friendly. They support
Ah,
the
got
Kurds.
it.
They
Got it.
always have for years, and no one could ever figure it out. Why are the Israelis always supporting the Kurds? There's two reasons. One is the Kurds have this idea of that they deserve a homeland. They
Mhm.
deserve an ethno state. So that narrative obviously bolsters the Israeli narrative. So they'll support that. But it was really strategic because they knew, and Israel, as well as the US, were pushing to break off Iraqi Kurdistan from Iraq during the first Gulf War. You know the no-fly zone they put
Yes.
in the first Gulf War? That was designed to create the partition of Iraq. And they got it, but Iraq and the neighboring countries won't allow Iraqi Kurdistan to be independent. So they had a referendum. They said, "Oh, we want to be independent from Iraq," and Turkey, Iran, and Baghdad and Syria said, "No, you don't. You're not going to be independent because in international law, your neighbors or more than half of your neighbors or something have to recognize you for you to be a viable independent state." And
Right.
they have no recognition. Only the U.S. and Israel and a few other stooge countries that are allied with us would recognize them. So that's the plan. Trust me. Once they have that path cut, then it's game on with Iran. And so I
How
think
far away are we?
that's a good question. I think I think there's a timetable. They want to finish this business and allow Israeli forces to get right up to Bukamal. Probably, I would say within the next 6 months, or at least before the fall. And that kind of puts them in pole position with the U.S. support, because the U.S. will support, even if it's an Israeli mission.
Yeah.
U.S. is going to be AWACS. They're going to be, all the different THAAD missile systems, all the boats, cruise missiles. It's a whole system of protection for Israel around the Middle East. I mean, can you imagine when you remember when the Iranians did that missile strike back? I mean, the amount of U.S. systems that had to engage
Yeah.
to defend Israel from an Iranian strike. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So that shows you, because Israel is such a small country, size of New Jersey, it has zero strategic depth. And as a country, you need, like Russia has great strategic depth. That's how they defeated the Nazis.
Mhm.
They had such depth. They moved all of their weapons production over the Urals. They moved their government inland. They adapted to war. It's very difficult to defeat the Russians because they're willing to, buckle down and do those sort of things. U.S. has probably the best strategic depth of
Yes.
any country in the world.
Without question. Yeah.
We
Without question.
it's very well endowed in that respect. So Israel has zero. So who provides the strategic depth for Israel? Just look at the map.
Yeah.
So the Iranians are saying they've issued a warning. They said if the U.S. does a preemptive nuclear strike, and I say nuclear because that's when Trump revised the nuclear doctrine. It was done so at the behest of Israel. They said you need to include uh, tactical, low yield nuclear weapons, ground penetrating bunker busters,
Yeah.
nuclear. Okay, and so that's in there. So I assume, based on this Trump nuclear doctrine that's been ratified by the Pentagon, I think in his last term, if I'm not mistaken. But based on that, it's going to be a preemptive nuclear strike. So Iran has said, okay, if you do that, every U.S. base in the region is going to be a target, and it's sent a warning to all of the Gulf states, to Iraq as well. With Iran's friendly with Iraq, but they
Mhm.
sent the warning. The U.S. is still occupying Iraq. Make no mistake about it. It's still
Sure.
a colony for all intents and purposes. But so they all become targets. So and the Iranian official said to the U.S., you have all these bases close to us, totally within the range of our hypersonic missiles. We've already demonstrated what we can do all the way in Israel how accurate they are. If you live in a glass house, you shouldn't be throwing stones. That's translated. That's what it said in English. And so it's actually a very good point. You know why? Because when the U.S. set those bases up, that was well before advances in avionics and missile technology that Iran now has. So the U.S.'s empire and imperial footprint in the Middle East, it's like 30 years old. It's 30 years out of date.
What
That's
once was your strength is now your weakness.
yes, yes. So they're able to beat on Yemen, and we can talk about that if you
Yeah.
want. But
Yeah,
but
I
Iran.
don't know that anyone understands what's actually happening in Yemen and these strikes that we launched, was it about a month ago now? And it continued. There was just another drone footage of another area being blown up. We are sending old sloppy missiles into Yemen. They are not accurate. We just had Larry on here the other day, and he was saying that the weapon systems that they're using are the most inaccurate weapon systems that we could launch from the water into the land, and we missed about half of our targets. So we're killing innocent Yemenis. And there
Mm,
are people, there are Zionists in America who say that no one is innocent in this region. Let me tell you one thing. This is the way I break down Israel, Palestine, and Hamas. We took out the mafias in New York City, right? We took them out. We didn't have to level New York City to take out the mafias. We took them out one by one. And if Hamas is the equivalent of a street gang in Palestine, then why are we destroying the entire city for a small group of people? That's obviously has a bigger agenda. And Yemen plays into this because they were the first ones to rush to the Palestinians' defense, doing what I mean, this is Yemen, right? This is like one of the most impoverished countries in the world with very little military. And they've attacked some ships, commercial stuff. But walk us through that. I don't want to get into my opinion of it, but why did we just strike Yemen? There seems to be no reason for us to do that strategically. It confused me. So I'd love to have the help on that.
oh, two reasons. Two reasons. The first is because Israel has ordered Trump to do it because Yemen's one of the last holdouts. Yemen is holding Saudi Arabia basically to account because they demonstrated. So what we did under Obama was we declared a proxy war in Yemen
Mhm.
under Barack Obama in March of 2015. The 10-year anniversary is just passed a couple weeks ago. And so what was the point of that? And people were trying to figure out what the reason was that at the time. And clearly the object was to partition Yemen into a north and south, and then to work on the north where the quote Houthis were, and eventually flush them out, and then reform the country as a colony of Saudi Arabia. It failed miserably because the so-called Houthis, whose real name is Ansar Allah, it's a political religious movement, much like Hezbollah, okay, and it has originally a real tribal from that northern part of Yemen, and they've tried so hard to put them down in their settlements on the Saudi side of the border as well as the Yemeni side of the border, and for different reasons. Just because they were very fiercely independent, and they have also tribal governing systems where it's self-governing. It's actually very efficient if it's set up correctly, and it's their democratic tradition, if you will, not kings and sultans, and no, it's very democratic. And the Afghans had a system like this as well until we absolutely obliterated it after 20 years of Afghani occupation. It's probably where the Afghans will end up reverting to anyway. So that was a waste of
Sure.
time, the Afghan war. So
Complete waste and money, trillions.
yeah, so Yemen, so we declared this proxy war. So the idea was at the U.S. foreign policy top level military think tanks in the 90s. And then after the Iraq war, with the amount of quote blood and treasure that was expended from these wars, they had to devise, and they've actually in reality been working on it since I would say the late 80s, early 90s, and to have local partners fight the wars for America, and then America just provides the support by military gear, training, and maybe some back naval support on the back line and Air Force as well if needed. And then all the big diplomatic big stick stuff. So they use Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Little did we know Israel was micromanaging this from behind the scenes.
Of
So
course.
on the coalition is U.S. planes, U.S. everything support. The only thing that was, Saudi pilots, not even all Saudi pilots, some retired U.S. pilots flying Saudi flag planes during bombing runs, and Israelis working at Central Command with the British. There was French, the Spanish were involved. This is the biggest untold war against one of the poorest countries in the world that has hardly ever been reported. They starved them. They created one of the biggest famines in recent decades. We didn't hear anything about that. They put it under siege, blockade, just like they have the Palestinians in Gaza. And to their surprise, to their shock, the Yemenis adapted. And they adapted in the biggest way and totally transformed their defense. They already had a tradition of missile engineers. It goes back, many decades. The U.S. keeps saying they're Iranian proxies. The Yemenis are not Iranian proxies. They're allies of Iran. Okay, they're
Hmm.
not proxies, and Iran certainly is giving them probably some technology transfer, some support, probably not that much. Iran is not flush with cash,
Right.
but they probably help them a little bit. But the Yemenis have done it themselves, and so they hit Saudi Aramco oil facilities with like a $2,000 drone, and these are Patriot missile defended facilities in Saudi Arabia. So Yemen, just like China DeepSeek AI upended the AI market, the Yemenis upended the entire missile defense market and the whole idea of deterrence. They've just blown it out the water. They absolutely wore down and defeated the Saudi Arabians, which is really an extension of the United States military and
Hmm.
the UAE. They didn't have ground troops to fight the Yemenis. They subcontracted them from Sudan, paying them peanuts to come, Africans from the RSF and Sudanese army people doing an extra tour, on the off season to make an extra whatever they're paying them, 500 to $1,000 a month, which is great money in
For
Sudan.
Sudan, yeah.
But of course, a lot of the money got sucked up in corruption. Saudis coming over with suitcases full of dollars to pay the troops. Troops aren't getting the money. The families of the bereaved aren't getting their compensation. Huge problem. Huge problem. And many Sudanese died fighting an American war, Sudanese mercenaries. We had our special forces in there. We had groups in there doing different things. We always do so they can get training, get experience doing covert ops. The British as well. That's usual for any conflict
Hmm.
zone as well. But we failed. This project failed, but we made money out of it. We made money selling the Saudis weapons, and they got sucked into this because MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, at the time was only like 32 or 33. He was very young, and he was highly impressionable, I think, at that age. And he got sucked in by the Americans into this one. And this is all for Israel because the
Yeah.
Israelis knew, they knew the Yemenis were the key because they have control of the Bab el-Mandeb Straits into the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And so they knew that if they didn't control Yemen early, that the Yemenis, should they go to move on Gaza, then the Yemenis could do exactly what they're doing: intercept Israeli shipping, control that waterway, which is in their territorial water. And all the Yemenis did was basically enforce the Genocide Convention, which
Yeah.
says you can't genocide people. We all signed it after World War II. They're enforcing that. They're enforcing the International Courts of Justice ruling, or at least interim ruling, against Israel. So the Yemenis are the only country that's willing to sanction the Israelis and back up their sanctions with military force, with what little they have. But they're actually very efficient because look what they've done.
Oh,
They pulled the U.S. over, all the
yeah.
way over, thousands of miles there, to deal with this problem. And the U.S. think they've been bombing the what out of the Yemenis for 10 years, and they think that a couple of weeks of fireworks is going to deter these people. These people are really tough fighters. They're really dedicated. They're in it for religious reasons. They're in it for human rights reasons. They see the Palestinian issue as one of the greatest injustices, and they said
Hmm.
we're not going to
Very
allow
vocal.
in our neighborhood, because they regard that as their neighborhood. They're not going to allow that level of subjugation and killing of innocent people, Muslims, Christians, anyone. To them, it's a humanity issue. And we in the West are so cynical. We can't believe that the people like in countries like Iran and Yemen would write something like that into their constitution, which means they are legally obliged to intervene if there is a level of injustice like this. This is a very civilized thing to do if you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't. We're arming and supplying Israel's military ammunition and bombs to create a genocide, and then Trump and our government's going to attack. Biden did the same, by the way. They're going
Yes, it
to
did.
attack. They're attacking the Yemenis because the Yemenis are trying to stop a genocide,
Yeah.
and the Yemenis did down tools, backed off when Trump came in with the ceasefire. When he came in after his inauguration, you remember it was like a
Mhm.
glorious moment. Trump ceasefire. Yemen said, "Fine, we'll abide by our agreement, which is we're going to stop interdicting shipping. We're going to
You
stop."
stop, we stop.
Yes, and
Mhm.
and then Netanyahu came to Washington on February 5th, right? Right after Trump was elected, and so now we know what that meeting was about. That was preparing to resume the war.
Mhm.
Okay, so that wasn't a ceasefire. That was a pause to rearm Israel and to give Israel a chance to its army was demoralized. They had to restock the ranks, the troops. They had to bring in new conscripts, all that stuff. They needed time to recalibrate for that, and so that's all that was to buy time. And you know how you know this? Because you did not see a word of pushback from Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, or Mike Waltz on March 18th when Israel resumed bombing Palestinians
Right.
in tents. And not only that, so that you didn't see any pushback from them at all after that. And then Israel blocks food, water, and medical aid. Why did they
Mhm.
need to do that? And that was the thing that the Yemenis said, that's it. We're going to resume our operation against Israel. You've broken your side of the agreement, then we're going to resume until you stop. Stop killing these people. Stop starving them. You know,
It's
it's not
atrocious.
it's unbelievable. So and I want to see Donald Trump do well. I
Me
want to
too.
see the US do well. I want to see him be the best possible world leader and set an example for the world. I want America to be great, but this isn't great what they're doing. This is
No.
not great. And this is not what Donald Trump ran on. And this is not why millions of people that I know voted for him. They didn't vote for this.
We
This
voted
is
to end the wars.
this is something else. And so I think this is, to me, a breach of the contract that Donald Trump had with America. Maybe it wasn't written down, but you better be sure
It's a
that
verbal for
that's a
sure.
mandate. He knows it's a mandate, and a big part of that mandate was because of that pledge he made. And he even trashed Biden for bombing Yemen. Can you believe that in 2024? What are we doing in Yemen? No,
Yep.
now Trump knows why we're in Yemen. We're in Yemen for Netanyahu and for Israel because they need that. And that's why we're in Yemen before. This is the problem I have with neocons and a lot of the guys in Trump's orbit that are supposedly foreign policy experts. They're
They're
not being
not.
straight with the American people
No.
about what the real geostrategic design of this is. And that includes taking out Iran. And they want to bring Iran back to the table for a deal. They already had a deal. The
Mhm.
deal was the JCPOA. It was working. And by the way, I'm the biggest critic of Obama you can imagine,
Yes,
especially on
you are.
foreign policy. But he did one thing right, was the JCPOA. That
Yeah,
that
I
really
agree.
that really took the pressure out of the region, and it put Iran on a full commitment with full inspections and oversight from Europe, Russia, and America. Guaranteed they wouldn't have a bomb. Now
Correct.
Iran has every reason to want a bomb. If you look at how we're hands off North Korea, Iran's saying, well, we would like that kind of deterrent. Oh, and by the way, Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal between 200 and 300 undeclared warheads. And you're expecting us to sign a deal with you and to open ourselves to non-proliferation or full inspections all the time, and Israel's allowed to have a secret nuclear weapons arsenal? No way.
That's right.
No way. And so and they're within their right. And that was I put my peace plan out last
Their
week.
largest enemy has what we're claiming they have, and we're not inspecting them, and that's part of the
Yeah,
reason and you covered this, that's why JFK was killed.
well, yeah,
One
it
of the
was.
reasons.
I think it was. And I think there's plenty of evidence that points to this,
Sure.
that John F. Kennedy was pushing for Israel to join the Non-Proliferation and Test Ban Treaty. And Ben Gurion, who was prime minister at the time, was pushing back on it. No way. Then Ben Gurion mysteriously resigns, and then Kennedy ends up dead a couple of
Yeah.
months later. I mean, that's not a coincidence, because you never heard about the Israeli nuclear weapons or any oversight after
Samson
that. It was like
option.
LBJ buried that whole thing, and that was the new relationship after that. I think it was defined by the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and with the JFK file dumps, there's plenty of evidence that points in that direction. Not to mention the fact that Israel stole all of the high-end nuclear technical knowledge and the enriched uranium itself from the New Mecca facility in Pennsylvania, and they used that clever. This is the part of the story that most people don't know. Israel still couldn't build the plant, so they gave what they stole from America to the French in exchange for the French designing a carbon copy of the first French nuclear plant in Dimona in Israel.
Oh,
And so,
wow.
ironically, France couldn't have nuclear weapons without Israel's help, and Israel couldn't have a civilian nuclear energy program that is used to create reprocessed fuel for future weapons without the French's help. They both created a secret program in tandem, and the French tested Israel's weapons for them in Sahara, in southern Algeria, and in the South Pacific. Because you noticed Israel couldn't test their weapons or their
Right.
bombs, so they did it under the aegis of the French. This is one of the biggest scandals in the world.
Wow.
The French have got off scot clean, and we always wondered why. What hold does the Israelis have over the French?
Hmm.
Now we know. Now we know.
Wow.
And so my argument is no country should be allowed to have a secret nuclear weapons arsenal, because they can hold the
Agreed.
world region hostage and extort them. And I think personally, my opinion, and I'm not alone, of course, that Israel's been allowed to extort and blackmail, nuclear blackmail, behind the scenes, the United States and other countries, to the point where people are like, this is a mad dog. And that's their mad dog doctrine, basically. And then they have the Samson option, which is that if we don't get our way or we feel like we're existentially threatened, we're going to unleash the Samson option, which is to launch all of our nukes, missiles, and blow up Europe and blow the region up, because if we can't have it, you can't have it, kind of thing. I mean, this is kind of insane. Why is this allowed to fester under the surface? And then we're going after Iran for something they don't even have yet.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, they've been talking about it. Was mentioned this before. The conversation of Iran is close to a nuclear warhead has been around since 1984. And I'm going
Mm,
to pause here too. So, we have, there's like the world is so divided, Patrick. There are people who are idolizing that's human beings seem to need an idol. You have one idol, it's Jesus Christ. It's the only idol you need in this world. But we seem to idolize. You have the idolizing of Trump, where he can never do wrong. The evangelical approach of he's led by God to do this, maybe, right? But what he's doing right now, Patrick is one of the few guys out there that calls balls and strikes. Period. What Trump is doing does not align with campaign promises. It does not align with an America first agenda in the Middle East and with Israel. And it never has. No president, really, since Kennedy, has ever stood up to the Israelis. They've always had their way. Most people forget that AIPAC used to be called the American Zionist Committee or American Zionist Commission. Zionists have had their foothold in this country for longer than most of us have been alive. That's just the reality of things. So when you're watching things like this, where you're hearing Patrick say things that Trump is doing this, these are factual events. They're factual. You cannot deny that we are bombing Yemenis. We're bragging about it. He put it on True Social. Here's a drone footage of us blowing these guys up. That's fueling this Zionist bloodlust for a greater war to expand with Iran. Tucker Carlson put out today earlier, he's like, we don't even have the capability to fight against Iran right now. We've given away all of our weapons. He's right. Now, I think we can take Iran out with no problem, but Iran has partners now. Iran has China. Iran has Russia. They have both economically partnered with Iran. We had Larry Johnson on here talking about his fear of this happening. And of course, there's this other agenda online that says, oh, it's just going to end in the final moment. Maybe. We don't know how things are going to turn out, but let's just call balls and strikes. And if you're watching this video and what Patrick's saying is upsetting you about Trump, I'm going to go both ways. Number one, you can't defend actions that have occurred. They're things that people have done. That is a factual event. These are factual events. However, that does not mean that this will end up in some disastrous scenario. So Trump has been in office less than 3 months. There's a lot of political pressure on him from all angles of every possible category. He has, in my opinion, an awful cabinet assembled for the most part, because most of them are Israel first people. You can believe that or not. That's completely up to you. But when you have the Secretary of Defense in 2019 in Israel stating that if he ever became the Secretary of Defense, one of his primary functions would be to build the third temple. That has nothing to do with America. That's Pete Hegseth. You can look at Mike Waltz, this whole debacle of Signal. Maybe it was screenshots. Maybe, I don't know. So I'm just trying to call balls and strikes with Patrick. And this stuff doesn't look very good for us when we have, Netanyahu. That was the second time he'd been to America. The first time he came was still under Biden, I think in November or December. And everyone in Congress was told, if you say a word while Netanyahu speaks, you will be arrested in Congress, which you can't do. So, it's just time for America to acknowledge this. I actually think, there's a lot of, you can look back at Trump's past. He had a Kabbalah teacher. You could look at Freemasonry is led by Kabbalah teachings. It's pretty obvious correlation between the two. You can look at a lot of things in Trump's background. One thing you can refer on is his past performance for the American people. He's been fantastic for us. However, the game that's being played in the Middle East right now is not a game. This is not something to mess around with. This is regional instability of people who have a proven track record of fleeing and not assimilating in other countries. This could get out of hand very quickly, which is why big wigs are afraid. But then there's people online who are like, I'm just going to grab my popcorn and watch this. I'm not of that acclamation. Maybe it's fake, maybe it's real. I tend to think all this stuff is real because I talk to guys like you who've been there, who are talking to guys like this. And when we look at, some of the nicknames out there for Trump that are emerging right now, I don't think they're fair. This is 3 months. Let's look at it a year from now, if we last that long, of course. But a year from now, I hope things are much different because his entire cabinet. I mean, look at Huckabee.
No.
You talk about you mentioned Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck read a letter that he wrote to Netanyahu on his radio show, bootlicking Israel, basically saying if he could do one thing in his life to make his life worth it, it would be to become an Israeli citizen and serve Israel. That's Glenn Beck. I have the video. There's no getting around it. So we have I was on here with Mike Sullivan doing it. We did a 2.5-hour breakdown of Christian Zionism and the confusion of scripture. And we won't get into that with you, Patrick, because I want this video to stay on YouTube. That video is removed from YouTube in 30 minutes. I am going to put it up this week again and try it out. I don't care if I get suspended. I have a small show anyway, and I don't make any money doing this. So I'm going to keep trying. But the American Zionist issue, the reason I wanted to bring Patrick on here is he's telling you things that are happening over there. Over here, all we hear about is how everyone is just constantly attacking Israel. They're this massive victim that has to defend its territory, protect its people. This is so far from the actual truth. It's not even funny at this point. This is like a 50 to 60-year-old con that is continuing today. And now it's extracting American wealth, American weaponry, Americans' ability to defend themselves in certain areas of this country. Thank God we do have depth in our landscape. We are literally, by the way, if you're one of those guys wanting to pour a concrete bunker, it will take nukes to take down America. There's no way a ground invasion would ever be successful in this terrain. It's just not physically possible. But I wanted to take a pause there to you're going to have people who are like, you're anti-Trump. You just said, I am praying for him. I'm hoping for him. I think this is going to turn out great. But right now you have to call balls and strikes. This is the job of an American citizen. Listen to all sides of a story, express your concern. Don't belittle other people for expressing their concern. But again, Patrick, we have psyops and funded operators all over the internet. And one thing that you've said on here, we went through JFK files. This is one thing I look at. If you're an influencer or a new media person who we're the media now, and you're not talking about the wrongs of Israel, you're not the media. You are propaganda. You are pure play propaganda. If they are all the guys who saw those JFK files, I was on vacation. I stayed up till 4:00 in the morning on my phone, digging through docs, doing searches with AI for the word Israel. The word Israel popped up 196 times in the first dump. I didn't even look in the second dump because it was nothing, super new. They just didn't redact Israel this time. I think there's a purpose behind that. There has to be. They've been redacting the name Israel our whole life in the JFK files. So now that we have this news, you have influencers out there who are now blaming it all on the CIA. Of course, the CIA was involved. Of course they were. They are part of Mossad. Those were formed almost the exact. The CIA and Israel were formed a year apart. Mossad's motto is, through deception, thou shalt wage war. So you have this 75-year psychological operations training unit that is a specialist in disguising their own intentions by motto, working directly with our intelligence assets. But make no mistake, these calls come from Israel. Lord de Rothschild created this Israel. This is not Israel of the Bible. If you mention Israel of the Bible in the comment section, I'm going to rip you apart with links proving you wrong. This is a deceptive, a very long play, deceptive campaign to gain support of the West to support the destruction of the Middle East, which Patrick has described to you, that the primary function is to kill and disperse Christians from the region. This is happening in your lifetime. And Patrick, you do such a good job on this. Let's get into Iran before we wrap it up, because I don't know how much time I have with you. But let's get into Iran. Let's clear the air here. The Iranian nuclear scare is probably garbage. It's been around since 1984. That is a 40-year hoax. This sounds a lot to me, and I've never been to Iran. I don't know any Iranian officials, but it sounds a lot to me like guys like Bill Gates and everybody else telling us we wouldn't have beaches in 50 years. There'd be no oil in 1970. This is just another hoax to provoke an intended outcome while manufacturing consent of their governed. This is how the world really works, guys. Nothing, almost nothing that's happened in your lifetime at a grand geopolitical scale has ever actually been serendipitous or natural. It has been forced. Patrick has just talked about how they continue to divide and radicalize and stimulate this division and strife in regions. The purpose behind this, there's a ton of hydrocarbons in that area. Everyone knows that. There's also a ton of gold. There's a ton of everything, ancient artifacts, ancient wisdom, brilliant minds in that region. And Patrick, you do such a good job on this. I'm going to promote it again. 20thcenturywire.com. You need to go to 20th Century Wire to pay attention. Pay attention. If you don't agree with Patrick, I don't care. I don't agree with 98% of people I listen to online, but I listen for their facts. And when you have the facts of this is time for the American people to start standing up and saying, we want our country taken care of first. Let Israel be Israel. When you provoke every fight, it's time to stop funding the defense of the provoker. The main provoking nation in the Middle East has been Israel since 1948. They were started. The first two prime ministers of Israel were considered terrorists on a global scale. The first two prime ministers, their entire army was created by people who were considered terrorists. You talked about Syria and Damascus and harmony between three different religions. That existed in Palestine for 1,000 years before Israel was recreated. There was no strife in that area. It was complete peace. And now we're here. So let's get it. Sorry to take up your time on this, but man, you do such a good job. And I think somebody needs to pat you on the back because you have this MAGA movement, which I love. Like, I love Make America Great philosophy. I love the people. There's some incredible people. I don't join gangs. I don't pick sides. I don't have a political party. I'm like a money guy. I look at things from the bottom line. Will my kids have a brighter future than I do? Will all American babies be more prosperous than their grandparents? That's what America was supposed to be. And can we be independent? And you'll touch a chord with people saying Donald Trump started a war when he said he didn't, and then he said he wouldn't do it. He is contradicting a lot of his campaign promises. And I love Donald Trump. I think in my lifetime, there's never been anyone more suited to be American president. But that has to be part of the allure to him is promises made, promises kept. Mm. I love him. I support him. There is not a single other politician that I would set behind. But I'm not going to sit here and be his lackey and disagree with things he's doing in silence. We all have to speak up about this stuff before we start seeing all millions of children killed throughout the country, throughout multiple countries in the world, and also ultimately having another 40 or 50 million people who don't want to assimilate crossing our border. It's all connected. They create wars to create refugees, to create revenue lines for NGOs, to pump more migrants into America, to gain more control over our politics. This is exactly what's been happening our whole lifetime. So let's get into Iran. And by the way, thank you for bringing up Glenn Beck. I used to love Glenn Beck until I saw like 3 clips, and I will not listen to the guy anymore. I do like what he has to say. but I just can't stand anyone who's going to bootlick Israel while they're claiming to be an American first person. I just can't do it. That's my tirade. Sorry, Patrick. Let's get into Iran, and we'll wrap it up on Iran.
Sure. I mean, all I'll say that's important about Iran right now is that we're very close to war. And the U.S., at the behest of Israel, just like they tore up the JCPOA at the behest of Israel, with the Mike Pompeo doing the dirty work, the former Secretary of State on that. But Israel is pushing the United States. The United States and Israel have a very strange relationship. And Israel has, in the past, has drawn up operations to do jointly with the U.S., only to pull out at the last minute, leaving the U.S. holding the can, and the U.S. with having to save face, go through with the operation, and then taking all the hit from it. This has happened more than once, by the way. And so is that what's going to happen here? Because they did that with Soleimani, with the assassination of Soleimani. So is this how it's going to go? Well, we'll see. But definitely, if there's a joint U.S.-Israel attack on Iran, or if it's a U.S. attack, or if it's an Israeli attack with U.S. support, whatever the configuration is, okay, they feel, Israel feels that this is their chance to take out the Iran, Hezbollah in South Lebanon, as well as Ansar Allah, aka the Houthis, in Yemen. And so they've taken care of Syria. That's done for the moment. And then there's the Iraqi resistance, which they're really pressuring the Iraqi government right now with money and financial incentives to disarm the PMUs, because the PMUs would hit U.S. bases in the event of an attack on Iran. The U.S. is concerned about that. So this needs to happen. They need this to happen. And they want to renegotiate Iran's missiles. They want Iran to dismantle their missile program, as well as disavow any future nuclear weapons ambitions, and eventually dismantle their civilian nuclear weapons, nuclear energy. So they're basically saying to Iran, you're going to have to give up your sovereignty for Israel. Now, this is a 5,000-year-old civilization. They are proud. They value their sovereignty even higher than financial benefits of being plugged into the global economy, obviously, because they've been taking sanctions for many over 20 years now. So this is what's happening there. So I think the fundamental problem is, to me, the security problem ultimately is Israel's nuclear arsenal. That's where things need to start. So my idea was that either, if there is going to be a new nuclear negotiations, I would advise the Iranians to say yes under one condition, that Israel is part of that deal, that they give full transparency to their nuclear arsenal, that they open themselves up to inspections. And you know what that means? That means they will have to either disarm. There's no way that you can deny, to allow a country that small that's carrying out a genocide to have a nuclear arsenal. No, I don't think so. So I think what's fair, and for the region would vote and agree with me, the Arab League would also agree, that both the countries should not have nuclear weapons. Okay. And I think Europe ultimately would have to accept that if the Gulf states and the Middle East accepted that. Or if Israel is allowed to have them, then it's only fair that Iran has it. And if you look at Pakistan and India, both have nuclear weapons, and they're both at loggerheads, but the odds of them ever attacking each other with nukes is very low. In fact, all the experts and all the people modeling conflict have said it's almost zero. So it's created a balanced deterrent that is kind of a stalemate, and it kind of offsets the threat. Which, listen, I'm not pro-nuclear weapons. I'd like to see the entire world be free of them, but unfortunately, the genie's out of the bottle. So, it does have a stabilizing effect with major powers. So I don't think, I don't think it's the end of the world if they have it. So either they both lose them and don't have them, or they both have them. I think that's a fair way to look at it. That's how I would start negotiations, and I think that there will be a lot of buy-in for that, because that's the underlying problem. You can never have, unless there's reciprocity, you can never have an honest conversation. You can't build trust. If you can't build trust, forget about signing any treaties. That's not going to happen. Iran already did that, and the U.S. rugged them, JCPOA. So that's where things stand now. If they do attack Iran, it's going to be ugly. Iran's going to incur some serious damage, but they're also they have thousands of hypersonic missiles that are
Hmm.
defended well underground that even a tactical nuke couldn't get to. Okay, we're talking inside mountains. Okay, so they have geared their entire national defense after the U.S. Gulf War and realized that they're going to be next. They knew that, and they've
Hmm.
been building for 30 years. So they're unlike the U.S. Iran's defense and military is custom made for their needs, unlike the United States. So who would you give the edge to in a war of attrition? I would give the edge to the Iranians
Sure.
because the price that they will extract from their Arab neighbors. What is the number one income source of Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, all who host U.S. bases? Their number one income source is hydrocarbons. Their
Hmm.
number one source of existence is hydrocarbons. If they want to keep that, they need to think really long and hard because they're targets, basically. And they, just like the Houthis, could take out a major Aramco refinery facility and bring Saudi to their knees with a 2,000-pound drone, $2,000 drone. The same thing could happen here on a much bigger scale. And by the way, that means Israel's going to get hammered
Yeah.
as well. And we saw what that looks like. And that was just a little taster from the Iranians. And they're very specific on their targeting. And it was really a demonstration of force. They know where other targets are. Israel only has a few military facilities. They're well marked. They're airfields, even Dimona. Okay,
Hmm.
that's not off. That will not be off the target list. So Israel has to think about this, and the region has to think about this. Is this what we want? When we all know what the problem is. The problem is you have a belligerent rogue state running a genocidal apartheid regime backed by
Hmm.
the world's biggest superpower. That's the problem. And that eventually this problem is going to get solved either the easy way or the hard way. And the hard way, could
It's
mean
not
an
good.
economic calamity for the rest of the world if they shut the Straits of Hormuz. Uh, Oil goes up to 200 plus per barrel, and then we're in a whole different crazy situation globally. And I don't think that's going to be good for anybody, quite frankly, unless Trump's rolling the dice here and he thinks this sort of a shock and artificially push the value of the dollar down and refinance that $9 trillion in debt that he's so keen to refinance. I mean, I'm not even thinking that it could be that dark. I'm just saying
Well,
we're
it's
we're
happening.
living,
Yeah.
we're living in very strange times. So I know it's the economy is very important to Trump, and he wants to land this plane on the economic question. And is war going to factor into that to the benefit of that agenda? And if it did, would forces around him be pushing him in that direction, uh, or pushing him without him knowing? And that's
Right.
not too difficult to imagine, is it? If you think about the forces of nature that are at play here, between Wall Street, Tel Aviv, City of London, you know, this is serious. So I mean, this has happened before in history.
Hmm.
We've been pushed into world wars, the U.S., bankers' wars, and wars by other means for people in power to maintain power or to consolidate or to take over land and countries and regions and things like that. So I mean, we're in it right now. We're definitely in that part of history. It's happening. Like this is one of those moments in history, like between the Second and the First World War, or like
Yeah.
the period right before the First World War, where the international system's collapsing. And so we've been here before as a society, but the people who knew these lessons have passed away, unfortunately, and we're
Hmm.
left with the children of the 80s are now running the world. So I don't know if
That's a
that's
good
such.
thing. No, we'll take that for right now. I guess I'm one of them. So,
Well,
yeah,
I'm one too, so but it is a little bit okay. This
it
is
has
not.
to be us because look at the generations behind us. It
Yeah,
has to be there. There's just no grit like that. Coming home from school and kids smoking cigarettes and everyone smoking cigarettes in their car with no seatbelt on. Now we have a society that can't ride a tricycle without a helmet. We've really been weakened in that process. Um,
I have two because two final comments. I know you're going to wrap up in a minute, but there are two comments on things that you said during your monologue in the middle. One of them was about MAGA. Okay, and MAGA has two camps. One camp is the cheerleading camp, and the other camp is the original MAGA camp that has very strong principles
Good
and
point.
who aren't afraid to criticize the leader. Okay. I am not in the first camp. I am definitely in the second camp. Okay.
Same here.
And the thing that people didn't realize, they didn't learn from Trump's first term. And if you paid attention to Trump in Trump 1.0, he was very responsive to the base.
Yes.
If the base was saying things, it would immediately come out in his speech and he would react. So he cared about the base. This is obviously different in Trump 2.0. He has a power base. He's surrounded himself. He's got his, A team, or what he believes is his A team. And he's under less pressure from Congress with the impeachments right now, and Republicans have control. So he's a bit less of a populist in this Trump 2.0, but he's still a populist.
Yes.
And the thing with a populist is the populist actually cares about what the base thinks. So if
Yes.
the base is withholding their feelings or their criticisms so as not to be in the out group or to feel like, a black sheep, then you're not doing MAGA any favors at all, because this president, because this may be your last chance to talk to a populist president that's actually paying attention.
Yes.
This might be your last chance. It might not happen after this. So this is your opportunity. You might not get it in the future. That you are part of the electoral mandate, and the president cares about your opinion. So if you stay quiet because you don't want to upset the cheerleading crowd, you're making a fundamental mistake. And you're actually really hurting your own democratic agency.
Hmm.
Because if you believe in populism, then that includes you. People think populism is all about the leader, and so quickly people forget that populism is about the people that elected the leader, and what the people feel, what they think. The leader pays attention. That's why the definition of a populist means that he responds to the popular will, the popular sentiment. And if the population's very well educated, at least part of MAGA, very smart, very on the ball, understands the issues, which many MAGA are, many of his supporters are, but many of them are being kind of kowtowed, and they don't want to ruin the party. And I know the victory lap is happening now, but there's so many important things happening in the world. People can't be quiet now. Now is the time that you really need to put pressure on Trump. It's the same with RFK. You remember the
Hmm.
Maha movement. So RFK's diehard supporters, I had this debate over the weekend at a big event in the UK I spoke at, and a lot of RFK supporters there. And people were asking me, what do you think about RFK? Do you think he's going to make a difference? I said, I don't think so. Not based on his performance in front of the Senate confirmation, where he caved on every vaccine question. I said, I was very disappointed. And they said, oh, but he's just saying that to get in the system. I said, you don't know how Washington works. The system molds you when you get into it. Yeah, I said he'll be shown to have made a bigger impact outside of government than he ever did inside government, and that's just the reality of politics. So rather than be a cheerleader of RFK and hoping that he does this or that, or hoping, you should criticize him. You should be hard on him if you really care about him and care about the issue, in the hopes that he will pay attention to that and alter his position. Because if you don't, he is going to get integrated with the swamp. He'll get integrated with the system, just like to some degree Trump. This will happen to Trump and all his deputies as well. And it's just a natural thing. So this is your chance. This is that really unique chance to, your job is to put pressure on them. It's
Yes.
not to cheer and hope that, they're going to do everything that they promised. We've been disappointed so many times with politicians and stuff like that, I've given up on that sort of hoping that they're going to do the right thing. No, we're going to make sure you hold them by the ear and you drag them to sign whatever bill or whatever, if that's what it takes. That's what I think is missing in this celebrity, social media driven political culture. It's all about memes and sound bites and clicks and views on Rumble and stuff like that. I see a lot of that on the conservative side. They seem to have forgotten the fundamentals of politics, and maybe are missing a golden opportunity to really see some of these great things happen, not just the rhetoric, but actual material change. So that's what I'll say to MAGA, and so people understand where I'm coming from, and others too. There's many Trump supporters I've heard are saying what I'm saying here. And the other thing I'll say, Eric, which is even more important, is that if with regards to what's happening in the Middle East, if we sit there and turn a blind eye to absolute injustice that we've all unfortunately had to be witness to of the last year and a half, even if we're not going to pay a price for that in our lifetime, or our president's not going to be held accountable, or Biden's not going to be held accountable for being a party to crimes against humanity or a genocide, God forbid, that doesn't mean that our children or our grandchildren are going to end up paying in retribution for the things that happened during our lifetime. These things get resolved eventually, even if it takes 1,000 years. Every single conflict goes back at least a couple hundred years, the roots of it, every single one. So we think we're getting away with it. And this is one of the flaws of the modern American kind of political minds. They really think they're getting away with stuff. And if they just, reelect the next government, that anything that happened before, no. And this is one of the things I think the Trump administration make a mistake. They keep blaming everything on Biden, and Biden will blame everything on Trump, and Obama will blame everything on Bush. No, you get into office, you own it, because it's America did it before, not Biden. America did that. To the people in the region, they don't care. They just see the flag. They're not going to say, "Oh, we love you now because you're not Biden." No, it's the American flag's been bombing them. That's their problem. And we are sentencing our progeny to potential war, or worse, or annihilation, because of things that we've allowed to happen during our lifetimes. I could say the same for the last generation and the boomers, and etc. So until people start thinking along these generational lines and really understanding, you don't get away with anything in history. If you're a Christian, certainly you recognize the concept of divine justice.
That's right.
That there's always going to be a price to pay. So what matters is what you do, whether it's political activism, whether it's speaking out, whether it's lobbying, whether it's mobilizing within your church or your community or your party, your political party, or whatever, or on the media. If you see injustice happening, no matter who it's happening to, it's really incumbent on everybody to act and to recognize that, because you don't want your children to pay unnecessarily for something that they had nothing to do with.
That's right.
And that's something we got to keep in the front of mind. I think that is so often forgot, especially in America, because we have a different idea, because we've been on top for so long that we think a lot of this washes like a water off a duck's back of history, but it's not the case. And I dread to think that the blowback, if it comes in 2050 or it comes in 2100, what that would be like. It's just we're not doing the next generation any favors or any justice, and by allowing these things to happen in the way that they are right now. So that's just a little another little concept that I think people need to take to heart.
I couldn't agree more. And it brought up two famous quotes in my head. So the first one was from Gladiator. Maximus says, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." That's true. And the other one is Ephesians 5:11. "Do not partake in the fruitless deeds of darkness, but expose them." That is a Christian saying. That is scripture. Like, that is literally the way we're supposed to live. We just look the other way. Oh, there's this horrible thing happening over here. That's all right. Trump's got it. I'll just go back to this. We have to speak up. You hit it right on the head. He's a populist. He will listen. He has proven time and time again. I bet Donald Trump is waiting for these big influencers and people to go, "Hey, stop bombing. Hey, shut down Israel," like in mass force. He'll do it. He's proven that he will do that.
And that gives him an excuse to tell even Netanyahu, "Look, you put me in a tight spot here. Look at the people. That's my crowd. That's my base. We're not gonna get elected, and you're gonna lose anyway with the next administration. So you better cut it out. We got to make a deal. We got to get peace. We got to sort this out." That's how it should work. That's how it works.
Exactly how it should work.
It's how it works in the movies. So, but it's not happening now. We've short circuited, right? Our democracy, our republic has short circuited over a lot of wear and tear over these many years, and we need to bring that kind of circuit of accountability and real, populism and really not just talking about our Constitution, but really, making it part of everything that we do, governing our, principles and values, and not just for us. We should want others to have that level as well, and especially free speech on our own U.S. shores.
We got to talk about that. We can't end without talking about that.
That's another important thing. It's college students, whether you identify with them politically or not, they're out there protesting a genocide in Gaza, or they're protesting for Palestinian human rights. They're being wrongly labeled as pro-Hamas terrorist rioters by Rubio and some of these other people. Absolutely despicable. Ben Shapiro, all these other Israeli lobby types, and the media on Fox News as well. They're part of this gaggle of magpies calling for deportations and stuff like that. How could the right? How can the right, after being, supposedly victimized by the radical left about, campus speech, language or speech is violence, and all this other stuff, cancellations, and you're a victim of that, and then you've turned around and taken it to another level after having your speech denied, after being canceled from all the social media platforms, getting your presence at events or whatever shut down under democratic regimes or party regimes. Now you're wanting to cancel people, and not just cancel them, deport them, even a legal resident in the U.S., deport them because they're criticizing a foreign government. This is insane. So you're allowing the president and Marco Rubio to do a direct full attack on the First Amendment. Okay. Now, and I'll be very hard on all of those people swore an oath, and they didn't swear an oath to, defend the government. They swore an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, the U.S. Constitution. And we all know what the most important amendment of the U.S. Constitution is. It's the First Amendment, because all other rights stem from the First Amendment. So when the First Amendment comes under attack, that is a constitutional crisis. That is a state of emergency as far as Americans should be concerned, because don't think it's going to stop with, international students or green card holders. They're coming for everybody. If you allow the First Amendment to fold, that's it. And so anyone on the right that's turning a blind eye to this, you have failed a major lesson of history. You really, and I will defend anybody's right for free speech, as long as they're, not yelling fire in a crowded theater, especially if it's to do with things like, protesting war crimes, or wanting to stop the massacre of women and children, or wanting peace. This is insane. And they're allowing a foreign lobby, in this case, the Israeli lobby, an undue level of influence in American political and social societal life, allowing them to shut down people's free speech and get them on a deportation list, and getting the government to compel them to deport them. This is crazy. You can't turn a blind eye to anybody who is not protesting this. Cannot A, call themselves a conservative, and B, cannot pretend to be an advocate of the U.S. Constitution. Full stop, period. We learned these lessons before. Our parents, our last generations would be scratching their heads right now if they were in a time machine watching this, because we already took our knocks for these issues. We got the country has the scars to prove it. And so how can we allow it to fold without a fight on the basis of some foreign lobby, and also just the the complete caving in of our own congressmen and senators to this.
No resistance to it. There's been no resistance.
Not even on the Democratic side.
No, I was going to say either side. Yeah, they're both all for it.
Yeah, the constitutionalists on the right, they should be up in arms against it, defending whoever, and as well as the liberal left. Because, I mean, traditionally, this is where you would get the most defense for the First Amendment. It's nothing. And we got a real problem with this. And it's not going to end with them. It's
No.
just like every other thing that we faced with COVID and the vaccines. It didn't stop. They kept going and they went hard. And they
Hmm.
got people fired from their jobs. They ruined people's lives, shutting down businesses, forcing you to do this, that, and the other. It's not going to end with the foreign students.
And here's the weird thing about this, Patrick, is that, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. 18 months ago, if you were to poll the MAGA crowd, if you just like take a blind poll, and I'm MAGA, so like I'm talking to you, I love you all, but we've got to have our heads screwed on straight because it's about us, not about Donald Trump. It's about us. This is our country, not his. And he's our leader, like no question. We have to support him, but we also don't blindly support. Do you blindly support anyone else in your life? I don't. My kid gets in trouble. I ask him what he did, not what somebody else, the other kid did. What'd you do? But 18 months ago, if you would have polled MAGA and said, "Hey, we're gonna go to this whole AI government model. We're just gonna do that. We're just gonna be the biggest AI group and use cryptocurrency for everything." 18 months ago, you probably would have got like 14% support. But now that it's done, because Biden was in office, because we were talking about AI government systems, and he was talking about all this stuff. He had an AI czar, the whole
Yep.
thing. That AI czar, no good. This AI czar, good. And I love David Sachs. I actually think that David Sachs, I criticized him on Real America's Voice when I first came out, but he sold all of his holdings. Like everyone should do that. He sold all of his holdings. So he actually can be very, very, very objective in the model. And I think they're doing a really good job with the crypto stuff. I really do. But AI, crypto's crypto, right? It's just allow it to be a competitor to the dollar. That's really all anyone wants.
Yep.
But AI is a different story. So, second day
Mhm.
of Trump's administration, he has Larry Ellison and Sam Altman front and center in front of the country saying these guys are going to create Operation Stargate. And MAGA, half of MAGA was like, yeah, Stargate's going to. I'm like, do you know who these two guys are? Do you know what they've done to the world? Sam Altman's done retinal scan, cryptocurrency scams, WorldCoin, Chat GPT is the more you're communicating about your person, like this is another trend. You're starting to see AI girlfriends. People are like posting that AI girl. 18 months ago, MAGA would have jumped out of their shoes if the government came out and said Larry Ellison and Sam Altman are going to lead AI. But it was Trump doing it this time, so it's like awesome, like great. Let's do. That's what Doge is doing, by the way, guys. Doge is uncovering waste, fraud, and abuse, corruption, all these other things. But what's the purpose? The purpose is to downsize government personnel to implement AI systems, which is a digital prison. And now they have full garnered support from MAGA because it's Trump now and Elon now. And Elon's becoming this folk hero. 2 years ago, nobody in the world trusted Elon Musk
Yeah.
on either side.
Yeah.
So we have this like changing. Now it's okay if, it's okay to deport people and arrest them for words they've used. That's literally the crime of these protesters is words. I think protesters are annoying. Like, I'm just going to throw it out there. I think they're annoying. I don't like radical Islamists. Actually, I did a lot of counterterrorism stuff, but I found out most of the counterterrorist teaching came from Zionists. So of course it was skewed. I don't support Zionism. I don't support Hamas. I don't support Palestine. I don't support Israel. I support God's beautiful children being left alone to live in peace and harmony. And anyone in the middle of that, I don't protest. I'll do stuff like this with you, or I'll put money towards things, or I'll make an impact in my own way. Protesters are annoying, but it's a right of every citizen in this country.
Mm.
And they're not. Somebody came up to me who's very much a Zionist, who's a friend of mine, and you can be friends with people who think he's a good friend of mine, and you can think differently. And he said, "Why are you so upset about deporting these kids? They're terrorists." And I said, "What kind of terror have they performed? They protested at a Jewish school about Palestinian rights, because that's the crime they've committed in the eyes of the administration." And I turned it around and I said, "Okay, so what if it was somebody protesting on behalf of Russia being left alone by Ukraine?" And he said, "Well, they already did." I go, "No, they've provoked that war too." But what if it's like you don't see anyone being arrested for taking a pro-Russian stance in the Ukrainian war? And you wouldn't see anyone if it was Iran and Iraq fighting each other. There would be no one arrested. The mere linchpin in all of this is Israel. So, like you talked about RFK, everything he said pre-election, I want. I vote for that guy 1,000 times over. But
Yeah.
what have we gotten in between? Sorry, I'm not going to stop the vaccines, but like, please stop with the anti-Semitism stuff, which even Jews know is a defense mechanism. Even they talk about it all the time. So, we have this changing of the guard. It's like almost like we live in a constant gaslighting convention. Like, I want MAGA to really evaluate what I just said and what Patrick just said. 18 months ago, the things that are happening today, 18 months ago, would have been revolting to you. Revolting. Nothing has changed. Nothing. The agenda has not stopped. An economic collapse and a regime change and a reset were coming, no matter what. Those are global powers. AI was a big fear of most of MAGA until Doge began and Trump started promoting that we're going to be the AI leader of the world, which is great. Like, if anyone's going to do it, I hope it's America, and I hope it's America using the Constitution as the regulatory foundation for open source decentralized AI. That changes the world, and those two phrases cannot be removed. And I promise you, Larry Ellison and Sam Altman are going to do closed sourced centralized AI.
That's right.
Trump, I think Trump is putting all this out here to see if we have the balls to actually say anything to him and not just treat him as an idol. I don't believe the media's claims of narcissism of Donald Trump. I actually think he's doing what a leader does. This is good for us. Throw it out here. It's what a CEO would do. Hey, I'm thinking about hiring this guy for the board of directors. Okay, cool. What do you guys think? And if it's all yes men, he gets hired. If it's no men, then he probably doesn't hire the guy. He's a CEO by nature. He is trying to get crowdsourced opinions from all of us. AI is great. Like, if open source decentralized AI will make humanity better. Sam Altman and Larry Ellison are not going to do that. They have a 30 and 20-year track record of proving this. And you mentioning the anti-Semitism. What is anti-Semitism? I get accused of being an anti-Semite because I spit out Jewish facts. I don't actually throw an opinion in there at all. We have a lot of these Zionists that are Christian, primarily running the government. I will retract my statement. I don't think Trump's cabinet picks are totally atrocious and awful. I just don't think many of them are truly America first. And I don't know if that's a product of DC or if that's a product of ideological or spiritual belief. But when every person in the cabinet is pandering to Israel while Americans are starving and being arrested for free speech violations under a president, this is not Donald Trump's job. This is our job, guys. We have to take accountability. We have to speak up.
I'll tell you why, Eric, and you're free to wrap it up at any point. But Trump was given a list of cabinet picks before, and he was given that list by, or he's provided by his transition team, and the head of his transition team, Howard Lutnick, whose right hand in that process was Jared Kushner. And the quid pro quo, everybody on that list that had anything to do with foreign policy, at least foreign policy or national security, had to show sufficient loyalty or fealty to the state of Israel and support all of those issues there. And so that's why that cabinet was selected. Pete Hegseth was not selected for his experience, competence, or leadership ability, which he has neither. And he's heading the biggest military force in the world. He has neither. He's a weekend Fox News host. Unfortunately, that's kind of what he is.
Oh, he was a soldier. He fought. He
fought,
definitely,
but
yeah. He wasn't a leader. Yeah.
But the highest rank he attained was major as a reservist, and probably even within the U.S. military, you could probably find a lot more people, I think, of stronger, upstanding character and ability than him. But he distinguished himself because absolute loyalty to the state of Israel and his commitment to building a third temple, which is kind of strange for a lot of people because that's not a normal thing.
No.
But he's part of that movement. And so I think that had a lot to do with his selection, quite frankly, and the fact that he's on the media a lot. And Trump likes, let's be fair, Trump has this weakness. He likes people who are on Fox or who have a big presence on the news, like Tammy Bruce. And there's too many of these people in his administration, as far as I'm concerned. But Hegseth's just an example of that. But it's also this: Mary Madelson wrote out a check. Total Israeli lobby contributions, $600 million to all Republican campaigns, including the president. So that's a big, and for Trump, it was about 230 million. Musk bundled at least 300 million, as far as I could see, at least. So Musk bought himself. How much does it cost, Eric, to turn the White House into your co-working space?
300 million.
Yeah, about 300 million. How many of us have got that spare? Not many people have that. So Musk is in a very exclusive club. And how much does it cost to basically buy the cabinet? So you provide the short list to the president, 600 million. Okay. That's the problem I have, because that to me is not American democracy.
No.
And I said the same thing when Obama was given his cabinet list by Citibank. Remember in 2008?
Yep.
Okay. And most everyone on that list became the first Obama cabinet. So, and I was against that. That turned me against Obama, even though I was supporting Ron Paul by that point. But I did consider voting for Obama as so as not to waste my vote on John McCain. But having found out about that cabinet story, plus his role in the banker bailout during the campaign trail in October of 08, that put me off Obama massively, and I realized he was just a stooge of the bankers, basically. So I will enforce my principles there against a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter. I will vote across party lines. If, like, I almost did RFK like you. I liked what I heard. I nearly voted for him. If he stayed in the Democratic primary and stayed on the ballot, I might have voted for him. But it was his blind support for Israel and calling the Palestinians the most privileged people, or pampered, quote, pampered people on the planet.
Yeah.
That was it. I was like, I've had it with this guy. Where's your humanity? Honestly, I can't support you. So, but I would have, and I didn't care what party he was from. So yeah, that's the long and the short of it. Is yes, money talks, and the Israel lobby is very well organized, very well funded, and they built up an incredible network of influence over the last 60 years. And now the tech bros and the technocrats, led by Thiel and Musk and these guys, and Alex Karp, and these guys, they have an incredible network of financial, corporate, and also social network of influence that is quite astonishing, to the point where you've got redneck conservatives that used to be proud of having an old Ford Banger that got 12 miles to the gallon, and that was like that was your tattoo for being a conservative, and now they're driving these cyber trucks that have as much less personality than a Dodge Dart. I wouldn't be caught dead driving one of those, and they're loving it because it's Elon, like you said. Oh, it's okay. Electric cars. Oh, that was the left. Carbon taxes. Oh, that was the left. Oh, but Elon was the left. He backed Kerry, Obama twice, Hillary, and Biden. Okay.
Yep.
Then he switched a year ago because he's smart. He wanted to protect his fortune. So he knew which way the wind was blowing. He's not a conservative. He's a technocrat. This is just a speed bump for him, Trump. He's,
Yep.
he has, Klaus Schwab would love nobody more than Elon Musk. I can tell you right now. Okay. He is the WEF's patron saint. Just because he's LARPing as a conservative now and pretending to be, or maybe he's more than a conservative. Maybe he's, something else. But
I think something changed. I think something, at least in what he's saying. I don't know him personally, so I
or
don't
he
ever
never
trust
was
anyone.
actually a leftist
Right.
progressive, and he just wanted to monopolize and game the total supply chain through his version of the electric car. So he's more of a Rockefeller, if anything, in his mindset. Doesn't care what party. I don't think
Sure.
he's very strong ideologically, quite frankly.
No.
He seems to be, I don't know what I guess money and
Well,
spreading his seed like Genghis Khan around the world. I don't know.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Is you can look at things objectively, or you can look at them through rose-colored glasses. But the bottom line is the good and the bad, and we don't know what the bad is. The good is it's pretty clear the Rockefeller Rothschild system and structure is coming to an end. Like, to me, that seems to be very apparent. And what does that mean moving forward? It means to me that we're going from Rockefeller and Rothschild into the technocrat era. This is unavoidable. This is just kind of the way cycles work. and obviously technological advancement is there. So people will probably listen to this episode and get bummed out if they're on the cheerleader camp. We're not here to be cheerleaders, guys. We're here to be contributing members of a society who can have open conversations with people who think differently, so that we gain better knowledge of the world around us and make better choices in our own lives. At the end of the day, I hate politics at this juncture. I always hated them. I got into them in 2020. I hate politics, but you have to pay attention to it. And at the end of the day, you watch and pay attention to the world to make yourself a better person. So you have a better family, a stronger community, and you fight back through that ripple effect. Build your own, take care of your home, take care of the homes next to you, build a strong community, voice your opinion, listen to shows like 20th Century Wire, Patrick Henningsen, follow him on Twitter, follow him on Rumble, YouTube. You're all over the place. I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you, but you do such a good job at doing this. And I watched some of the comments and some of your posts. Guys, it's getting ridiculous when someone poses a question, why is Trump doing this? And all of a sudden they're the black pillar, you work for Mossad, all this. Like, that's exactly, by the way, your statements are exactly what the bots say, who actually are employed by the intelligence agency to sway your opinion. Let's just take a look at things, thank people for giving us facts, disagree with their opinions, express your own opinion, and move on. You know, arguing with people on Twitter is not saving the country. Voicing your opinion is, and getting it out there. So, Patrick, where can everybody follow you, and how can they find you out there?
Yeah, the main thing is our hub is 21stcenturywire.com, and from there you'll find the Sunday Wire show, which is every Sunday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S., and then the Midweek Wire, which is a new show we started a couple months ago, and that's Wednesdays, usually around 1 p.m. noon, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the shorter show, all geopolitics, all hard politics, basically. And we've got articles and content analysis every day on the site, new content. And then we also support a lot of independent journalists, some of whom write for us, or some of them who don't as well. So that's always something that we have done is to sponsor and to help some people do, investigations and things like that. So and we try to recognize them as well throughout the year. So yeah, that's what we do. So we're trying our best to stay up with things, but this is a crazy world we live in. So never a dull moment.
Let's hope this whole final push is to get to a point with Iran where Iran does what you're saying. Like, go ahead and inspect us if you inspect Israel. And then I think a lot of problems are solved throughout the world. I think that's one of the more genius proposals you have there. Maybe that's the end game. Maybe that's it.
So.
Yeah.
That would certainly be a good start.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us here. 2 hours. This is such a gift. Thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on here in a couple months and kind of keep things afloat and find out what's happening around the world. But you are such a treasure trove of information. I hope everyone watches this, follows you, because I do. I watch your content every day, and just appreciate your forthright, your valor in some of these areas, because you are calling balls and strikes like everyone in the media actually should be. So God bless you. God bless this country. And we'll see you next time, Patrick.